Yes, in the last session, we mentioned two very interesting phrases. One was cultural poetics, which was used by Stephen Greenblatt, and the other was a very beautiful construction by Louis Montrose. And that beautiful construction was where he was talking about historicity of text and textuality of history. So if we see this expression, historicity of text and textuality of history, especially in this expression, textuality of history, we are at the heart of post-structural ideas. Because remember Jacques Derrida's words. Derrida said, there is nothing outside the text. And how this one sentence was also used by many theories belonging to deconstruction, where he talked about the kind of textual universe in which a text is imprisoned. So there is nothing outside the text, or there is no outside text. In other words, the textual nature of knowledge, textual nature of history, which was the favorite, say, hunting ground of deconstruction. And when New Historicism talks about this idea of history, where history say, consists of two things. One, events. And second important thing is recording of those events, or telling a story about those events, or narrating those events. And this narration, this telling of those events, it comes in the form of text. That means history is always narrated. History is always narrated, and there is this element of narration. There is this element of textuality in the narration of history. So this was an important aspect of New Historicism, which was highlighted by Louis Montrose. Now, there is also a context why Louis Montrose highlighted this aspect of New Historicism. Because when New Historicism appeared on the scene, it was greeted with suspicion. And I'm giving you two examples how its reception was met with a kind of satirical intent. We have already come across the work of J. Hillis Miller. J. Hillis Miller. Hillis Miller and M.H. Abraham, they were engaged in a debate. Hillis Miller had a very interesting career as a critic who used deconstruction in his approach, especially in his later phase. Now, Hillis Miller was the president of PMLA. You know that this important organization, you also use MLA handbook. You also use MLA handbook. Now, MLA handbook comes from this organization. So, Hillis Miller made a remark during his presidential address, and the remark was that these days, suddenly, we see a turn from theory to history. So here he creates a kind of binary where we see a turn from theory to history. In other words, what he meant by theory was engagement with text, engagement with textual nature of those works, engagement with a deconstructive kind of those texts. So turn from theory to history. That means suddenly history becomes important in the American academy. So Hillis Miller tried to create a kind of division between the works of the academics. On the one hand, there were people like him who believed in theory, people like him or Demand before him who believed in theory. On the other hand, there is this new breed of critics which is interested in history. So this was one observation. And another interesting observation was, and it was not an observation, rather it was a remark which was made by one critic, Edward Pfister. Remark is important. The remark is a new a new specter is haunting criticism. A new specter is haunting criticism. The specter of new historicism. Does it ring any bell? A specter is haunting criticism. The specter of new historicism. In other words, here it is a parody of the famous words of Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, where they said, say, a specter is haunting the specter of communism. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. And you know that Jacques Derrida also used this concept when he talked about hauntology, when especially he was responding to the state of affairs in American universities after the fall of Soviet Union, and when that thesis of the end of history was advanced. So if we see this line, a specter is haunting criticism, the specter of new historicism, here it is treating new historicism with an element of mockery. There was another view which was coming from different places, that new historicism is nothing but a kind of Marxism. So at least from this discussion, we can make out that the influence of Marx, or the influence of at least Marxist approach, is quite visible on new historicism. But new historicism cannot be reduced to Marxist ideology, to Marxist beliefs, especially in the United States of America. Now, let us think about the work of new historicists. And probably the most important aspect of any new historicist reading is that they have a very different view of historical periods. That means historical periods do not present a very coherent kind of picture. There is only discontinuity. There is only contradiction in historical periods. This means that new historicism is trying to take an issue with older form of historicism, where it was thought that we could probably know history. We could know history as it really happened. And we could also know something about a particular time period. And here it brings us to some questions in historiography. You see, in the 19th century especially, there were two dominant schools of history writing. One school of history writing where one thought about the achievements of individual genius. That means there are some isolated monuments or work of some individual genius, heroes which were important. So history could be thought in terms of the achievements of those geniuses. But there was another method of writing history, and that method of writing history saw history as a kind of progression of ideas. That means a kind of seamless progression of ideas. And there was this historicist approach where history is part of larger cultural history. And here it was informed by Hegel's idealism, philosopher Hegel. So what we see in this, we see a kind of progress in history. We see a kind of development in history. We see a kind of progression of ideas in history. And here I can quote the words of Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle said, I'm quoting these words, the history of a nation's poetry is the essence of its history, political, scientific, religious. And here you can also see that literature was also written in relation to history. So what was the view? That you read literature in the context of history. That means you have some idea about history, you have some idea about the essence of a particular historical period, and you see the reflection of that idea in works of literature. One very famous work, especially a work which talked about Elizabethan period, was the work of E. W. Tilliard, right? Now, if we think about E. W. Tilliard and his famous work, The Elizabethan World Picture, in that work, he tried to talk about the Elizabethan world in terms of some ideas. That means in terms of a spirit of the age, in terms of some, say, dominant notions which you could see in the Elizabethan period. And so what are those ideas? Say, for example, the idea of divine order, where God occupies the highest place and gradually they God to man, then animals, and so on. There was this idea of the chain of being, the chain of being. And also there was this idea of this kind of correspondence between the earthly and the heavenly existence. So you have the earthly existence and you have the heavenly existence. These are important ideas of the Elizabethan period. And they present the Elizabethan worldview. So that means Elizabethan worldview presented a very seamless picture where one could talk about Elizabethan worldview in terms of this correspondence between earthly and heavenly existences, where you could talk about Elizabethan worldview in terms of this idea of great chain of being, or in terms of this idea of divine order. And of course, maybe there were some dissenting figures at that time. Somebody like Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe, you know that he was an atheist. He was, say, even his plays suggest somehow that idea. But Tilliard is making this point that some dissenting figures like Marlowe failed to make any dent in this Elizabethan worldview. So what emerges from this older form of historicism is that one can know a certain period in terms of its worldview, in terms of the spirit of a particular age. So this was the Elizabethan spirit. And if we think about another period, we say that, okay, this was the age of reason. 18th century, we say that it was the age of reason. And then we say another period, we say that, okay, romantic period, it was the age of imagination. In other words, a historical period appeared seamless. A historical period appeared, say, unproblematic. A historical period appeared without any contradictions. A historical period appeared without, say, any discontinuities. Right? Now, new historicism does not accept this view. It takes a different line altogether. So first of all, one important idea that new historicism uses and that you can find in new historicist criticism is that there is no text which is primary and there is no text which is a kind of background material. You know that if we followed the older historical school, what we did was we learned something about the spirit of the age and we saw the reflection of that spirit in a work of literature. So for example, we know that, okay, Elizabethan period believed in the concept of divine order. Now, how does a Shakespeare play present the concept of that divine order? So it became a very simple kind of affair because that older school did not stress discontinuities in that period. New historicism, on the other hand, does not consider a literary text as primary. In the older criticism, say that background material was used to understand literature, which was the primary, say, text. But in new historicism, there is no text which is primary. That means if somebody is studying a play by Shakespeare, it is not only that play by Shakespeare which is important to understand that play. It is also maybe a particular report that is written at that time. Maybe it is, say, a trial of somebody which is done at a particular point of time. Maybe a legal text, maybe a political text, maybe an economic treatise, maybe a judgment pronounced in a court. All these texts also become core texts. So if we think about a play by Shakespeare, that play by Shakespeare does not become the central text, and other texts do not become the background text. Rather, there is no distinction between all those other texts and this text. In other words, something which was considered very, very special in new criticism, where a work of literature was considered very important, where a poem had a special status. Now that special status is denied to literature. Rather, literary texts also exist alongside all those other legal, political, and economic texts. So, first of all, what we see here, there is no concept of background and foreground. There is also a term which is used that new historicism believes in a kind of parallel reading of text. So if a critic is reading one text by Shakespeare, he is paying equal attention to all those other texts which he can hunt, which belong to that period, which suggest something about this text, which can show some points of similarity, which can show some points of correspondence between different kinds of text. So literature loses its special status on the one hand, and literature also loses, or a poem loses, or a play loses its special status as a primary work which can possibly use some background material. So this concept of parallel reading, this concept of considering all texts as co-text, this concept of considering even supposedly non-literary texts and reading them like we read works of literature. That means if we offer a close reading of a play by Shakespeare, we can also offer a close reading of a report written by an administrator. We'll see one essay by Stephen Greenblatt. That is an interesting essay. The title of that essay is Invisible Bullets. Now I would like somebody from your class, maybe Sabur is here, Sabur says, and you can seek somebody's help from your class. You can possibly get the text of this essay, Invisible Bullets. I'm sure you'll find this essay by Stephen Greenblatt. Try to read this essay. In this one essay, you'll find a very clear idea about the method that new historicist critics use. And since it is an essay by Stephen Greenblatt, so, and he is the most important critic belonging to this school, you will learn a lot. But what is there in this essay? He's talking about Henry IV and a play by Shakespeare, Henry IV and Henry V. But Stephen Greenblatt also mentioned the trial of one person who was tried for heresy. This person was tried for heresy. And he also mentions one report written by an administrator. Right. And similarly, he also mentions many other texts which are not considered literary texts. And he studies those texts very closely in order to arrive at some understanding of the question of power in the work of Shakespeare. Now, we have talked about two important concepts here. We mentioned power, and you know that it is an important concept which all new historicist critics study, the question of power. And the other important concept that I just mentioned was the concept of history, where history is not considered seamless, where history is not considered continuous. Now, at this point, we can introduce one very important name in New Historicism, who is a major influence on New Historicism and who is also a major influence on cultural materialism. This is the name of Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault. I'm sure you have heard Michel Foucault's name. It is difficult to categorize his work. You can say that he is a philosopher of ideas or he is a historian of ideas. And he sometimes talks about those aspects of history which the discipline of history has not considered important. And Foucault is an extremely influential figure in contemporary literary theory. Why he is an extremely influential figure in contemporary literary theory? Because many other schools of criticism, whether we talk about Indian writing in English, whether we talk about Dalit literature, or many of those elective papers that you are studying, there you can see the influence is actually coming directly from Michel Foucault. So, what are some important ideas which had a kind of influence on New Historicism? We can talk about three important ideas. One important idea is that historical periods, for example, historical periods are not continuous, and rather history moves through lurches. That means historical periods are not continuous and history moves through lurches. That is one important idea in Michel Foucault. And the second important idea in Michel Foucault is that you consider any age in terms of its contradictions. That means in any age, you will find competing worldviews. In any age, you will find different sets of ideas. In any age, you will find opinions which contradict each other. And so, if we say that Elizabethan period has this worldview, Elizabethan period has this particular spirit which defines this, an idea which was there in old historicism. Now that idea takes a beating in new historicism. So one important idea in Foucault, that history is discontinuous. And the second important idea, that we have competing interest. We have competing interests in history. And the third important idea, which is a very important idea, is the idea of power. Idea of power. An idea of the functioning of power, how power works, and how power influences all walks of life. So let us think about these three important ideas. That means no age presents a very unified kind of vision. And so somebody like Tilliard, who presents the Elizabethan world picture, is actually wrong. Rather, an age must be considered in terms of its conflict. So an age is a site of conflicts. So if we think about Elizabethan period, then Elizabethan period will also show different worldviews, different kinds of concepts, different kinds of contradictory concepts. So this is important that we must be able to explore the multiplicity in a particular age. And this becomes an important task before a new historicist critic. And so when a new historicist critic studies a text, he also relates that text to all kinds of text, offering a kind of parallel reading of all kinds of text. So if somebody is studying Dickens, for example, then it is not only Dickens' concept of childhood which becomes important. It is also all those opinions about childhood which were current in his time, which could be seen in legal texts, which could be seen in political texts, which could be seen maybe in children's stories. And it is only by relating Dickens' treatment of childhood to those legal texts about childhood, political texts about childhood, texts of economics about childhood, stories, fairy tales about childhood, that we can arrive at some kind of understanding of childhood. So it is not only one text of Dickens, it is his text along with all those other texts. That is, so three important ideas coming from Foucault. History moves in lurches, it is discontinuous. History presents a site of conflicts and the functioning of power. Now, this question of power is extremely important in Foucault. Functioning of power. It means Foucault rejects the idea of power coming from one direction. Say, for example, the king. Say, for example, a dictator. Say, for example, a ruler. But rather, power can be found in all spheres of life. Power comes from everywhere. Power can be seen in all relationships. Power can be seen in all interactions. Power can be seen in all possible encounters. In all possible encounters. And so this is a very dynamic view of power. And here we can also introduce another concept at this point of time. And what is this concept? The concept of discourse. Concept of discourse, because this is a word which Foucault uses. And Foucault also defines discourse. And he defines discourse in different ways. But one important aspect of discourse is that discourse is used to control people. Discourse is used to, say, put people in their places and so on. And here we can say something interesting, because this is one important strand in new historicist criticism. It is one important strand in post-structuralist criticism, which believes that power often comes from discourse. Maybe I should stop here at this point of time, and I must let you speak something about this topic, because tomorrow we'll continue our discussion of Foucault and also of new historicism. But maybe now you can speak, you can come out with something, or if there are some questions or some comments or some observations, then you can possibly go ahead. So by way of revision, what we have done so far, we talked about Stephen Greenblatt, we talked about his say early career, where he wanted to do a dissertation, and he went to Yale University. And you know that Yale University will become a very important center of deconstructive criticism, and how his project was met with decision. And he says that he also spent some time with Raymond Williams, and Raymond Williams showed him to approach text very differently. And there we learn that when he comes back, when he say joins California, Berkeley. So there was complete isolation of different departments. But his project will mean interaction with professors of other departments. Or in other words, it was not only his concern to study literature, it was also his concern to study history, sociology, and other subjects. And hence, new historicism is really interdisciplinary in one sense. And how we learned the concept of historicity of text and the textuality of history from another practitioner of new historicism, that is Louis Montrose. And in this period, we try to see how Foucault's influence is seminal on new historicism and cultural materialism, especially on new historicism, and especially three ideas of Michel Foucault. One, where history is discontinuous, it does not present that kind of seamless march of ideas, and history is also understood as a site of conflict. And the third important idea, where you see that power comes from everywhere, and they will have a very important influence on new historicism. And we also noted one very important activity of new historicist criticism, that they believe in all kinds of text. It is not simply a text which works as a foreground and other text as background, but rather there is no foreground, there is no background. All texts are equally important. All texts are kind of co-texts. And that's why they have the same kind of reading of those non-literary texts that we offer of a literary text, so whether it is a legal text or any other text. So maybe I would like to hear something from you, because tomorrow we'll meet at the same time. Somebody, please, Hafsa, you haven't spoken at all. Yes, Hafsa. Munira ma'am, can you make somebody from this class participate actively in the discussion? I leave it.
let me try.
No, you can ask somebody. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Where's Hafsa? But just now, Hafsa, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm there.
Okay, so can you add something, or would you like to pass?
Ma'am, I would like to raise a question.
Okay.
So as you talked about the textuality of history, and you also mentioned that this particular approach about textuality of history makes new historicism a post-structuralist approach.
Yes, right.
So can you speak a little about this particular concept?
Okay. Okay. You see, before discussing new historicism, we discussed deconstruction at great length. And when we discussed deconstruction, especially one sentence that was used by Jacques Derrida that became very, very controversial also, and it became very, very influential also. The sentence was, there is nothing outside the text. There is nothing outside the text. And in a different translation, it also read, there is no outside text. In other words, Derrida was talking about the textual nature of knowledge. That means all knowledge comes through text. And all knowledge, in fact, is also subject to that slippery medium of language. And we saw that how these words of Jacques Derrida resulted in a kind of deconstructive criticism, especially practiced by Paul de Man and Hillis Miller, where word became extremely important. Word became extremely important. That means the slippery medium of language, the slippery medium of words, or indeterminate nature of language, or the concept that words cannot mean something stable, or words cannot say something determinate. In other words, when we saw one particular essay written by J. Hillis Miller, and we analyzed that essay in the classroom, where we saw that how he just picked up two words from another essay and he tried to build his entire argument by talking about the ambiguity that those words contain, the word parasite and the word host. In other words, in deconstructive criticism, often what was stressed was the slippery medium of language, unstable nature of meaning, unstable nature of language. So meaning becomes unstable, language becomes unstable, and so there cannot be any certainty about meaning. That was the concept. When we say that new historicism also is post-structuralist in its emphasis, and when we say that, okay, new historicism talks about textuality of history, it means there is this view of history where history means some events which take place, some events which have taken place in the past. But then there is also the narration of those events. There is also the recording of those events. There is also the writing of those events. And writing involves language. And language is a slippery medium. Language means some element of indeterminacy. And furthermore, because history becomes a kind of narrative here, it also uses many of those devices which are used in literature or in writing which is considered literary. So in historical writing also you can see figures at work. In historical writing you can also see that element of indeterminacy. In other words, we cannot be sure about capturing the complete picture of a historical event. That picture is always contaminated by the written word. That picture is always influenced by the written word. So this notion of history, where you have an event and you have the writing of that event, but since there is a kind of skepticism about writing, and so this skepticism is common to deconstruction, and that skepticism is also common to new historicism. Only thing is that new historicism does not indulge in that kind of wordplay which it did in the hands of some critic belonging to deconstruction. Did you understand, Hafsa?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
There was another question also. I would very much appreciate if you just type that question and send me on WhatsApp, or you can share on the group also that question, because I saw that question, but I was not able to read that question properly. But we can start with some of these questions tomorrow. But let us be very clear about the concepts first. So we close our discussion here. Anything? Good to see many of you. Yes.